Okay. Hi, I'm Kat Maker, and my presentation, as you've seen, is called The World's Largest Issue. So when I first came on this trip, we're going to start in this corner right here, or that corner. I was really overwhelmed by all of the world's issues and all of the problems that had to be solved. I came on this trip specifically trying to figure out what direction I wanted to go in, what I wanted to pursue. I was already planning to major in international development, but I didn't really know what that was going to look like for me. So we were asked in one of the first few weeks, in a video yourself, what is the world's biggest issue? Gender inequality. What I was thinking of was issues I'd been learning about in my IB geography class for the past 2 years. I was thinking about women who had no opportunity for education. I was thinking about female infanticide, genital cuttings, and so much more. And what happened is that in the beginning of South Africa, I read this book called Girls and Sex, Navigating the Complicated New Landscape by Peggy Orenstein. And the book kind of shocked me. It compiled a lot of statistics and stories from high school and college girls all around the United States, and showed a lot of patterns and underlying factors that I had never really thought about before. So it had a few major themes, but two big things I took away from it were that girls were consistently putting boys' needs above their own, and that girls were consistently worrying about being judged. And I started to think about how these things that she was talking about had impacted me and had impacted girls I knew in high school. And I started talking to my TBBers and talking about these issues and how they had played out in their own lives and what they had seen. And it kind of got me thinking more than I had been before. And then Trump got elected. Gross. One of the first things that really struck me about this was that he had said such atrocious and disrespectful and inappropriate things about women, but still almost 50% of our country thought that he would make a good candidate to represent us and to make policy decisions. What else struck me is that had Hillary been a woman, there is a much greater chance that she would be our president today, and that we live in this democratic society, and that we're this developed nation, but still, women are still not able to have these roles, and they're still being held back because of their gender. As time went on, I started thinking more about how there were more men in power making these decisions, and women weren't having the voice that they should have, especially with Trump and all the policies he's making, and how not okay that is. So it kind of came here, you can see in the very top, with this idea, or this unawareness of all the issues in the US. And these two events started to open my eyes to the idea that there's so much more at play than I knew. Now, I had a lot of thoughts throughout India and in the beginning of Ecuador, but it was towards the end of Ecuador that another major thing happened. So, to give you some background, at the beginning of the trip, we were told that we were probably going to gain weight because we didn't have control of our diets, because we didn't have access to the exercise we normally had, and that when you got home, it was proven in TBB past that people were going to lose this weight anyways. And so throughout the trip, mostly the girls have been gaining weight. There have been a lot of complaints, a lot of people upset about it. But what I didn't realize until we started having more discussions in Ecuador was that this wasn't just something that they were thinking on the outside a few minutes a day and complaining about. It was something that was really impacting them throughout the day, and really something that they thought negatively about themselves and was hurting them. And that was not something I was okay with. These were people I cared about who were being affected by such negative influences. And so I decided that I wanted to do something about it. I was really frustrated and really sad and confused, and I wanted to figure out what these issues were and start having a discussion about how we could fix that. So I initiated and co-led a body image seminar in Ecuador, and we talked about how we felt about our bodies and why we felt that way. And we had a lot of discussion. There were two major things that I took away from this. One being that going in, I thought the media was going to be the biggest factor into how people felt about their bodies. But what we talked about a lot more was the communities around us. So people talked about families and relatives who, when you get back, the first thing they talk about is your weight, or you've lost so much weight, you look so great. Or moms who are commenting on their own bodies, and then you think, well, that's like my biggest role model right there, and she doesn't like her body, so I have to think about mine more too. Or your friends are body shaming, and when they have less arm fat than you do, but they're saying, oh my god, I have so much arm fat, and then you're like, oh my god, I do too, I have to fix that. And it's just ridiculous. But it leads people to feel so badly about themselves. Another thing that I realized was that this change, I guess I kind of already knew this, but it really set in stone this idea that this change was not going to happen overnight. And it wasn't going to be something that you could just change by saying, that's dumb, and telling people why that's dumb. It's a long process. Another thing that happened around this time was, so we were in Caballal, Ecuador. It's a small community, has roughly 100 people living in this town, village. And as soon as we stepped off the bus, boys started falling in love with some of us. They would tell everyone, they would sometimes talk to the girls, sometimes not. And it was really funny. You know, you have these boys, don't know us, going around telling everyone in town, all of us, oh, we love her so much. She's so great. And it was really funny. But what I started to realize was that girls didn't feel like they could really reject these boys. Maybe they would say no, but they weren't firm in that. They didn't feel comfortable really stepping up and saying, no, this is my space, you're over there. Or no, we're not going to talk about this, you can't say these things to me. Because they were worried that they were going to hurt the boy's feelings, and they were worried that they were going to be judged, not just by that boy, but because we were living in this small community, word was going to get around that they had said these things, and the whole community was going to be upset. And those were the two major themes that I had taken away from this book, Girls and Sex. And they were happening in real life, in a way that I had never seen before. So, looking at this, I started thinking, yes, it's a real issue that these girls are feeling this way and thinking these things, but what about the boys? And I realized that what they were doing was objectifying us from the minute we stepped off of that bus, and they hadn't talked to us. Throughout the whole trip, they could barely talk to us because of the language barrier, but they were still so infatuated, and they would go so far as to get upset or get angry when girls were talking to other guys, even though they did not have any kind of relationship. And they really thought that they had this right to us that they really didn't. And this got me thinking about the other implications of scenarios earlier in the trip. And I could think of so many situations, but there are two I want to highlight. The first, you can see this on your right all the way over there. The first is one of the first few weeks in South Africa of the trip. We went clubbing. It was really fun. We showed up, and there were these drunk men, incoherently drunk men, coming up and trying to dance with us. They were so drunk. But what we had to do to keep them away from us, we developed offensive dancing. It looks like this, I get too close, like this. And it was great. They were confused, they were staying a few feet away. But what I realized looking back is that they really thought that they had this right to us and that they could try and get close to us. And had they not been so drunk, maybe they would not have been so harmless. And that even though we were verbally saying no, we had to dance them away in order to keep them away from us. And then I think about a situation in India. So I was living with Sarsha and Maddie at the time, and we were in the car with our host dad, and he decided to give us some life advice. Really great advice from dad, we were all excited. And so for Sarsha, he says that she should smile more. For Maddie, he decided that she needed to talk more. And for me, at first that was perfect. He didn't think there was anything to change. And he was like, oh wait, you would look better slimmer. And I laughed a lot. it rolled right off of me. Maddie got mad. But what I realized looking back is that he had this view of what women should be like and what roles they should play, and he decided that he could try and put us in that box. Not only that we should be in that box, but that he had this right to tell us how we should better conform to what society expected of us. And that's not something he should be able to do, or even something he should be thinking of doing. And so this led me kind of to the conclusion that there's this worldwide objectification of women that I've never really been thinking of before, and that plays into the idea that there's so much more going on in the US than I thought. So I want to take us back to this side over here for a little bit, and talking about how I thought the world's biggest issue is gender inequality, and I was thinking of the things I've been learning about in geography. So on this trip, I was able to see and connect to these ideas more than I had been from my classroom in North Yarmouth, Maine. In South Africa, we visited patients, and I met with a few women who had HIV or AIDS or other diseases, and had they been educated, had they been empowered and been able to say, no, we're going to use protection, or no, I'm not going to have sex with you, or had they not had to turn to prostitution to support themselves, they would not be in that situation. And that's so wrong, and I've never been able to really see that before. And then in India, I think of two NGOs we visited that were really inspiring. The first was called Jaggori, and essentially it worked to bring women who had survived sexual assault and survived rape and help them come back from this while combining that with environmental work. We visited a restaurant called Shiro's, which is run by and hires specifically women who have survived acid attacks. And they were both run by women, both helping women who would otherwise be ostracized by their communities and giving them not just a support system, but a way to support themselves. In Ecuador, the thing I think of is not necessarily exactly what I learned about in geography. It's also an issue that's around the world and in the United States. But this idea of teenage pregnancy and the lack of fathers. So my host family that I lived with had a single mom at the top of the household, and she was living with 3 of her daughters. One of them was 20 and had a 4 and a 6-year-old sister. Daughter. Had 4 and 6-year-old daughters. And the other one was 16 and had a 2-year-old daughter. So both of these women had started having kids at age 14. And had they been educated, had they been able to get themselves out of Capital like some of their older sisters had been able to do, they would be able to have this job, have husbands, and be living with their children at a much older age. But what I realized looking at these issues was that I had never fully interacted with the things I've been learning about in geography. The homestays we were living in did not have these most dramatic of issues I've been learning about. And even these issues I was able to see and connect with and talk to people and have conversations, I could have those conversations, but I could never truly be a part of their struggle or truly understand what they were going through. And so I asked myself this question, at what level can I connect to these issues? And this got me thinking that maybe my role in the future isn't abroad, as I've been thinking for the past couple of years, but it's at home in the United States, because there's so many issues to be solved here, and because there's so many better ways or other ways to support women abroad without trying to identify the solutions to their problems myself and stepping into that role. Before I go back into this center idea that you can see that I feel much more prepared for the future, I want to talk for a minute about this phrase, empowered women empower women, down at the bottom. This is something my co-counselor from the all-girls camp I've been attending for, this will be my 10th summer. It's something she likes to say a lot, and I always liked it, but I never really saw how important it was. But starting with these ladies over here that I met abroad, the women from those NGOs in India, Jaggori and Shiro's, were out there leading these amazing programs that might be small, but they were so effective and so helpful for these women. And that's amazing. And not only them, but the women who are going and working to empower themselves and bounce back from such horrific events. And then I think about my host families, and I lived with 2 single mom households and some other great moms. And all of these women were so open about their culture, about their own lives, trying to hear about my life. They wanted to do everything they could for me, and more importantly, they wanted to do everything they could for their children. And they were working as hard as they could to give their children the best opportunities. They did everything around the house. They were just so kind and generous. And then I think about our in-country program directors. In South Africa, Cecily; in India, Bella; and in Ecuador, Carola. And they were out there trying to share their culture with us, trying to help us learn, and help us give back to these communities that they cared about so much. And that's awesome. And then looking at this other side, people from America or the Netherlands, I think about first my TBB women, who on this trip have been so open and so inspiring. I think one of our strongest traits as a group is our supportive community, which I came to realize is not always the case. And whenever anyone had a real issue or had a struggle that maybe they were denying, we really came together to talk about that in an open way and a supportive way and try and help each other through that. I think about the body image seminar we had and how I learned more about how these communities had negatively impacted people, and that made me think about my own community that I've grown up with and how special it was that I had these family and friends who weren't giving me all of these negative comments that impacted me. Maybe some, but definitely not on the scale that I heard about. And I thought about all the great things they're doing. I thought about my camp community, as I talked about, all girls camp, run by all women, for young girls, trying to empower them and give them this world of good, as we like to say. And I thought about women everywhere in between, and all the inspiring things all these people are out there doing and working for. And so I kind of came in this, as you can see in the blue over there, this inactive appreciator, and I think I've come out really actively appreciating my support system and all these great role models I have. So you take all of these things, and it comes together to this idea that I feel much more prepared for my future. You take these women, and I see them out there doing so many things, men too, and thinking that there's so many great things I can do and so many possibilities. I feel a lot less overwhelmed by the world and all the issues, kind of fully seeing and appreciating all the different directions people are going in. So no matter what direction I choose myself, I feel confident that there are going to be people out there going in all these different directions to try and solve these issues I think are so important. I think about this over here and my idea that maybe my role isn't abroad. And it brings me back to an idea we talked a lot about in India during our education unit with Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. This idea that the oppressed must be the liberators of themselves. And I think that this trip helped me realize that there is this movement that I'm really a part of and the struggle that I can really stand behind. And that, of course, doesn't mean I can't support other struggles, support other people, but it means that I found my own direction. I think the body image seminar in Ecuador helped me to realize that I do have this power. I think maybe I didn't change people's mindsets overnight, but we've started having more discussions. We've realized that these issues are not something you struggle with yourself, that there's something other people have and can connect to, and that shows that there's this wider pattern, and it gets people thinking about the changes they want to make and how they can do that. I feel like I'm ready to keep learning. Been reading more books, more watching documentaries, listening to podcasts, and I think a big part of this learning is the idea that I want to keep talking to people, whether that's to hear their ideas or share my own. And then the next big step for me is college. I've already decided to change my intended major from development studies to a double major in development studies and gender studies. And I think that in this struggle, the worldwide objectification of women not only leads to these issues on the right side of this chart, but it also is underlying these issues over here, in that if women were seen as equal and not seen as these objects or as people who don't deserve these rights, then a lot of these issues would start to disappear. So I think the world has a lot of problems and a lot of issues that need solving, and I think that the worldwide objectification of women is one of the biggest.
So we do have time for one question. We have 2 minutes until we have to broadcast the next POL. And we have time for a brief response. Yeah.
Sorry.
No.
You hinted a lot about in your discussion about coalition with other, we could say, oppressed groups.
Yeah.
Do you see that as perhaps a tactic you can use, building coalition with other groups and getting support from those other groups that might help you in what you want to do?
Yes, I think so. For example, we visited the Open Gov Hub this last week, or when we were in DC last. One group doing one thing, but it was all these small groups coming together, and they had discussions a lot, like activities together, and they were talking about how coming together they were able to not only learn about each other's issues, but learn what had been effective for them, how they could help each other, and I think that that kind of community is really great and helpful. Answer your question.
I have a question from an opposite perspective. Do you think this experience helped give a more nuanced understanding of feminism? So like by race and by class and by nationality or language?
Yes. I think I could probably talk about that more, but I also don't have time. Hi, guys. Hi, Gran.
So when you were in the bus, you talked about the boys, and these were the Ecuadorian boys,
Yes.
right? What about the boys in the group?
They're great. When we were in South Africa, they were the part of the people dancing away the other boys. And we also had a seminar after with the boys, which maybe the questions we asked weren't so great, but I think that the understanding was there and the openness to ideas was there.
So what is your plan to become an empowered woman who empowers other women?
I think coming up here and talking about this helps empower other women. I think camp is a great community that I've always had and will always have, where I can really be this role model. I can think of so many role models I have from camp. I mean, I really don't know where my future is going to take me, but I think that being open to talking about things and having those discussions is really what leads that.
I gotta end there. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.